April 7, 1943, Henderson Field, Guadalcanal. The air shimmered under the Pacific sun as the smell of fuel and oil hung heavy over the battered runway. A metallic click echoed as the hose disconnected from the Grumman F4F Wildcat. Second Lieutenant James Elms Swett, his uniform clinging to him in the heat, climbed into his cockpit. His heart beat steady, but his hands, rough from years working in his father's marine turbine shop in San Francisco, betrayed a calm that was more mechanical instinct than nerves. What he didn't know was that the next 15 minutes would lift him from obscurity, an ordinary American worker, to the status of a living legend. As the ground crews stepped back and the canopy sealed shut, a voice cracked through the radio. Condition red, condition very red. Then came the words that made every pilot tense. 150 Japanese aircraft inbound from the north. It was the largest enemy raid since Pearl Harbor. And the men of Guadalcanal, just 76 Allied fighters, were all that stood between the incoming armada and the U.S. fleet below. James Elms Swett was only 22. He had never fired a gun in combat, never seen an enemy aircraft outside of training reels. But what none of the Japanese pilots knew as they advanced in their tight, disciplined formations was that the young Marine waiting for them possessed a combination of technical genius, sharp instincts, and courage that would soon rewrite the day's history. James had been born in Seattle in 1920, raised among machines, noise, and grease. His father, George, was an engineer who built marine pumps and turbines, unglamorous but vital work that kept ships alive. Young James grew up understanding the rhythm of machinery. To him, engines had a heartbeat, and precision meant survival. There was nothing in his youth that screamed hero. He went to San Mateo High, then to the local college, just another working-class kid. But when the government launched its civilian pilot training program, James signed up without hesitation. The first time he took off, something clicked. Flying wasn't work. It was instinct. By the time he joined the Navy's flight school, he had 450 hours of flight time, more than some instructors. He finished in the top 10%, earning his gold wings and, at his own request, transferred to the Marine Corps. A year later, he found himself in the sweltering heat of the South Pacific, part of VMF 221, the same squadron that had fought and bled at Wake Island. His aircraft, the stubby, rugged Grumman F4F Wildcat. It wasn't fast or sleek like the Japanese Zero, but it could take punishment and dish it back out. Henderson Field wasn't much of a base. A single steel runway carved out of jungle mud, surrounded by sandbags and tents. Malaria, heat, and rain ruled the place. But Henderson was the key to the Solomons, and the Solomons were the lifeline to Australia. Every pilot knew that if Henderson fell, the Pacific might follow. For days, Swett had flown patrols without action. But on that April afternoon, the waiting ended. Japanese bombers, nearly 200 aircraft, were heading straight for Guadalcanal in a massive counteroffensive planned by Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto himself. The mission's goal: crush American air power and sink the ships at Tulagi Harbor. At 2:00 p.m., as Swett's division of Wildcats returned from a routine patrol, the warning came through. "Launch everything," his operations officer barked. Mechanics yanked the fuel hoses out mid-fill, gasoline spilling onto the runway. Swett scrambled back into his Wildcat, Bureau number 2284. The propeller spun, the twin Wasp engine roared, and the fighter clawed down the runway. He barely cleared the trees, then began the slow, agonizing climb for altitude. Every second mattered. The Japanese were minutes away. Above the blue Pacific, the sky filled with American fighters, Wildcats, Corsairs, P-38s, and P-40s, all rising in desperate unison. Swett's eyes scanned the horizon. Then he saw them, tiny black dots against the northern sky, swelling larger with terrifying speed. "Tally-ho! Bandits 12 o'clock high," he called over the radio. Multiple bogeys. Fighter command answered simply. All fighters engage. Good hunting. No tactics, no plans, just survival. Swett rolled his Wildcat into a steep dive, aiming for the enemy formation. Below, Japanese Aichi D3A Val dive bombers flew in precise lines, sunlight glinting off their wings. They were slow, each carrying a 1,000-pound bomb, but if they reached the ships, they could tear the harbor apart. Swett locked onto 3 bombers that had drifted slightly off course. He lined up behind the last one, centered it in his sight, and pressed the trigger. The Wildcat erupted with the roar of 650 caliber guns. Tracers streaked forward. The first Val burst into flames, its rear gunner vanishing in smoke. Swett banked and dove onto the next. Another burst. Another explosion. Within seconds, 2 bombers were falling into the ocean. He climbed, turned, and dove again. The third enemy exploded mid-air, scattering debris through the sunlight. 3 kills, 90 seconds, his first combat ever. Then anti-aircraft shells burst around him. American gunners below fired blindly into the sky, not distinguishing friend from foe. One shell detonated near his wing, peppering the Wildcat with shrapnel. The aileron was damaged. The plane jerked and wobbled, but Swett held it steady. He checked his gauges. Oil pressure steady, engine temp good. He stayed in the fight. Ahead, he spotted another formation of 6 bombers heading for Tulagi Harbor. Their fighter escort was gone. He dove again, guns blazing. The first Val disintegrated, the explosion so close it shook his Wildcat. The second burst into flames. One by one, he cut them down. Short, precise bursts. No wasted ammunition. His training guided every move, every squeeze of the trigger. Another Val went down, then another. The 6th took longer. Swett had to close to near point-blank range. So close he could see the Japanese gunner's terrified eyes. He fired until the bomber exploded. 7 kills, 15 minutes. But when he lined up his next target and pressed the trigger, nothing. Empty. He was out of ammunition. He could have turned back. Any sane pilot would have. Instead, he kept charging at the last bomber, trying to force it to break off its dive. The Japanese gunner fired back, bullets ripping through Swett's canopy. The glass shattered. Fragments cut his face and filled his eyes with blood. The engine coughed, sputtered, then began smoking. The oil cooler was gone. His Wildcat was dying. With his face bleeding and the engine choking, Swett turned for home. Henderson Field lay 15 miles away. The black smoke thickened. The propeller slowed. Then, silence. The engine seized, dead. His fighter became a glider over the Pacific. He trimmed the controls, scanned the water, and spotted a calm stretch near Florida Island. If he ditched just right, he might survive. He opened the canopy, tightened his harness, and brought the nose up. The Wildcat hit the water hard. The impact smashed his nose and threw him against the panel. The cockpit filled with water instantly. The heavy engine dragged the plane down. He reached for his belt, fumbling through the blood and seawater. The harness jammed. The water rose. He was drowning. He kicked, pulled, screamed underwater. Finally, with one desperate heave, the strap tore loose. He shot upward, lungs burning. His life vest failed to inflate. Then, suddenly, a hiss. It filled with air. He burst through the surface, gasping and bleeding, but alive. Minutes later, a Coast Guard rescue boat spotted him. They hauled him aboard, handed him morphine and a bottle of whiskey. He drank, still dazed. By the time they reached shore, the battle was over. The Japanese had lost dozens of planes. The fleet was safe. And Second Lieutenant James Elms Swett, on his very first combat mission, had shot down 7 enemy aircraft. Word spread quickly. Witnesses confirmed his kills. Admiral Mark Mitcher personally nominated him for the Medal of Honor. Swett would go on to fly over 100 missions, scoring 15 confirmed victories before the end of the war. He was 23 years old. His story didn't end there. He survived another ditching months later, rescued by islanders who paddled him through enemy waters. He met President Roosevelt at the White House, and when the war ended, he returned home to the same machine shop he'd left years before. The same smell of oil and steel, the same rhythm of machinery that had once trained his hands to fly. He never bragged about the 7 kills. He talked about teamwork, maintenance, and preparation. He taught kids about responsibility and respect, not glory. Do your job, he'd tell them. Support your teammates. Take care of your equipment. That was what mattered most to him. In 2006, the History Channel recreated his battle in the series Dogfights. Viewers saw computer-generated explosions, tracer fire, and chaos, but Swett's voice in the episode remained calm, almost technical, describing his maneuvers as if explaining a machine. He had always been that way, steady, humble, precise. On January 18, 2009, Colonel James Elms Swett passed away at 88. At his funeral, Marine jets roared overhead in a missing man formation. The flag was folded, taps played, and his story, one of instinct, courage, and unshakable will, came to rest with the man himself. 15 minutes had turned a quiet engineer's son into one of America's greatest airmen. And yet, James Elms Swett never believed he was extraordinary. To him, he was just a man doing his job. One flight, one mission, one decision at a time. But history will remember those 15 minutes over Guadalcanal as the day an ordinary man met destiny in the skies.